He dismissed me the way you dismiss a waiter who brings the wrong wine, not with cruelty exactly, but with that particular brand of effortless contempt that powerful men reserve for people they've already decided don't matter. Marcus Devereaux looked at me once, at the beginning of the evening, catalogued everything he saw: the department store dress, the modest earrings, the woman who had shown up alone to his engagement party without a +1 because there was no +1. There hadn't been for a long time, and he filed me under irrelevant. Then he turned to his real guests, his real life, his real world, and forgot I existed. I should have let him keep forgetting. My name is Sarah Nguyen. I am 30 years old. For most of the past 3 years, I have been invisible, and I had almost made peace with that. Almost. My sister Emma got engaged 6 weeks ago to Marcus Devereaux, heir to Devereaux Capital, a biotech investment firm that managed roughly $4 billion in assets across the US and Europe. She called me from what sounded like a restaurant, her voice pitched at that frequency she only reaches when something has gone exactly the way she always imagined it would. "He proposed at dinner," she said. "He got down on one knee. The ring is 3 carats. I said congratulations and meant it, mostly. What I did not say, what I had learned not to say, was, 'Emma, are you sure?' What I did not say was, 'Emma, I gave up 3 years of my life because you told me you needed me, and you never once asked if I was okay.' What I did not say was, 'The last time you called me crying like the world was ending, I believed you, and it cost me everything.' 3 years ago, I was a senior associate at Hartwell & Cross, one of the 15 best intellectual property law firms in the country. I specialized in biotech patents, the complex, high-stakes kind, the kind that took 18 months to file, and protected research worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I had billed over 3,000 hours the year before. I was on the partner track. My mentor, a former MIT biochemist turned attorney named Christine Park, had told me quietly over coffee that my name was being discussed for early partnership consideration. That almost never happened for someone my age. Then Emma called. She called on a Tuesday evening in November. I was in the middle of reviewing a patent application for a gene editing process that could eventually treat Huntington's disease. Outside my office window, the skyline was doing that thing it does in November, where the lights come on early and the city looks like it's trying to compensate for the darkness. I answered on the second ring because it was Emma, and Emma only called when something was wrong. She was crying so hard she could barely get the words out. "Mom collapsed," she said, "at the grocery store. She's in the hospital. I can't do this by myself, Sarah. I can't, please." I was on a flight the next morning. My mother had experienced a minor ischemic stroke, the kind doctors call a thanks in advance, a transient ischemic attack, which is a terrifying name for something that, in her case, resolved almost completely within 24 hours. She came home after 3 days. By the end of the first week, she was doing her crossword puzzles again. But by then, I had already put my cases on hold. By the end of the second week, I had extended my leave. By the end of the month, I understood that leaving had cost me more than I'd realized. 2 major clients had asked for reassignment. The partner track conversation had grown quiet, and the case I'd been building most carefully, an 18-month patent application for a French biotech firm called Billionaire Fiancé, had been transferred to a colleague who would finish what I had started. I stayed for 3 months, then 6. Then Emma started dating Marcus Devereaux, and somehow 6 months became a year, and then 2 years, and then 3. And by the time I understood that I had been waiting for a permission to leave that was never going to come, too much time had passed to simply walk back into the life I'd had. I did not blame Emma, or rather, I blamed her a little, privately, in the way you blame people you love for things that are partly your own fault too. She had genuinely needed me in those early weeks. The rest, the staying, the not going back, that was my choice, or my failure to choose, which is the same thing in the end. Now, I worked freelance. Patent consulting, mostly for small startups who couldn't afford the big firms. I lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in the same city where I'd grown up, 40 minutes from my mother's house, and I told myself it was fine. It was enough. It was a life, even if it wasn't the life. The engagement party was held at the Devereaux estate in Westport, Connecticut, on a Saturday evening in late October. It was the kind of house that didn't look like a house so much as an argument, a 90-year-old Georgian revival on 3 acres of manicured lawn, lit from below so it seemed to glow from within, a house that had never had to explain itself to anyone. My mother called me 4 times in the 2 days before the party. Each call contained a variation of the same message, delivered in different registers of anxiety. Don't be difficult. Don't bring up work. Don't make it about yourself. The Devereaux family is important. Emma is happy. Let her have this. I said yes to everything. I always did. My aunt dropped me at the end of the driveway because I hadn't wanted to arrive alone in an Uber, which felt like announcing my aloneness. The walk up to the house took about 3 minutes and felt like entering a country with different customs. Women in gowns I could not have afforded on 6 months of freelance income. Men in suits that fit the way suits only fit when they are made for a specific body. The kind of casual, practiced elegance that is not casual at all, that takes years of money to produce. A woman with a clipboard checked my name against a list, and the pause before she found it was 3 seconds too long to be accidental. Inside, the main room had been opened up to accommodate roughly 60 guests. There was a jazz quartet near the fireplace. There were 2 full bars and circulating trays of things I didn't recognize. The flowers alone, white orchids in towering arrangements at every corner, probably cost more than my monthly rent. I found Emma near the windows, surrounded by 3 women I didn't know, all of them laughing at something in that light, practiced way of people who have been trained from childhood to make social performance look effortless. She looked beautiful. She looked like a stranger. She saw me and excused herself from the group, and when she crossed the room toward me, her smile was real. But her eyes were doing that thing where she's already thinking about the next thing. "You came," she said. "I told you I would." She hugged me quickly, then stepped back and looked me over with an expression I recognized, a fast, involuntary assessment of everything about me that might cause problems tonight. The dress passed. The jewelry passed. Whatever calculation she ran behind her eyes came out acceptable. "Can I ask you something?" I said. She was already looking over my shoulder. "Sure." "Why did you really call me home 3 years ago?" Her eyes came back to mine. She had the grace to hold my gaze without flinching. The question landed. I could see it land. Then she said quietly, "Tonight is not the night for that conversation." "I know," I said. "I'm not trying to start a fight. Someday we need to have it." She squeezed my hand once, tightly, and went back to her group. I found the bar. Marcus Devereaux made his entrance 30 minutes into the party. I had looked him up, of course LinkedIn, his firm's website, a few business press profiles. The photographs had not prepared me for the reality, which was that he was one of those men who occupy space differently than other people, who seem to operate under a slightly different set of physical laws, who make the rest of the room feel arranged around them rather than existing independently. 40-something, dark-haired, the particular kind of handsome that comes with the knowledge that the world has always cooperated with your face. He moved through his guests the way water moves around rocks effortlessly, changing course without losing momentum. Emma became a different version of herself when he reached her. Not worse, exactly. Smaller. He noticed me the same way he noticed the furniture, registered my presence, assigned a category, moved on. Emma introduced us briefly. He shook my hand with the efficiency of a man who shakes hands as a professional courtesy rather than a human gesture. "The patent consultant," he said, as if consulting were a provisional activity, something one did while waiting for a real career to begin. Then his attention moved on, and I ceased to exist. The party had a texture I recognized. From the few times in my law firm years I had attended events like this, a social ecosystem with its own hierarchy, its own language, its own unspoken rules about who was worth talking to, and for how long. I was at the bottom of the hierarchy, and everyone had read the seating chart even if there wasn't one. Dinner was served in the formal dining room, which seated 60 at 2 long tables. I was placed near the end of one of them, between a distant cousin who spent the meal looking at his phone and an empty chair that filled 20 minutes in with a woman who introduced herself only as from the Boston office and directed all further questions toward the person on her other side. Marcus sat at the center of his table, where the light was best. On his left, his mother Isabel Devereaux, 60-something, blonde, wearing the particular expression of a woman who has spent a lifetime deciding who is worth her attention and has grown comfortable with those decisions. On his right, 2 men and a woman I didn't recognize. I watched them the way I used to watch opposing counsel in a deposition, cataloging patterns, reading body language, filing things away. The 2 men on Marcus's right were European. Their suits had a cut I recognized from 3 years of traveling to Paris for client work, bespoke, French. The particular elegance of people for whom clothing is a form of communication. They spoke with Marcus in a mix of English and rapid French, and Marcus's French was good, fluent, easy, another acquisition, like the house and the suits and everything else. The woman was younger than the men, an associate maybe. She took notes on a small leather pad. I understood then that this was not only an engagement party. This was also a business dinner, the engagement being the occasion but not the point. Marcus was courting these Europeans for something. The energy at that end of the table had the particular charge of men who are deciding whether to trust each other with money. I turned back to my food and stopped paying attention. The toast came after the main course. Marcus stood, champagne in hand, and delivered 12 minutes of exactly the kind of speech you would expect from a man like him, charming, funny, in a practiced way, generous in a manner that somehow still managed to be about himself. He praised Emma with the vocabulary of a man who has learned that women like to be told they are remarkable as long as the speaker is still the subject of the sentence. He thanked his parents. He thanked Emma's mother. And then he paused, looked down the table toward me with an expression of theatrical warmth, and said, "And of course, Emma's sister Sarah, who I understand has a very interesting career in patent consulting. We're thrilled to have her with us. It takes a certain kind of person to step back from the larger stage and find fulfillment in a supporting role." The room laughed. It was a light laugh, the social kind. The kind you give, not because something was funny, but because you've been given permission to be amused. My mother's face tightened. Emma's smile stayed fixed in place, which was its own kind of answer. I raised my glass. I took a small sip. I set it down. I did not smile. I did not react. I had learned, over the past 3 years, how to receive small violences without flinching. And this was a small violence, deliberate, public, the kind designed to establish positioning before the evening was over. I filed it away. The man to Marcus's right, one of the French visitors, was watching me. He was the older of the 2, silver-haired, with the kind of face that has processed a great deal of information over a long time and learned to betray very little of it. He was not laughing at Marcus's toast. He had not been laughing for the last minute. His expression was something else, recognition, maybe, or the early stages of it. I looked away first. Coffee was served, and the room softened into smaller conversations. Marcus moved through his guests again, the European men in his orbit now as he steered them toward what I understood would be the real business of the evening. I drifted to the edge of the room, near the windows, and watched the dark October lawn through the glass. "You studied in France?" I turned. The silver-haired man had appeared beside me. His accent was light, French, the kind worn smooth by years of working in English. "Paris," I said. 3 years. "Before that, I studied in New York. Your firm was Hartwell and Cross." It was not a question. I looked at him more carefully. It was... He turned slightly so that we were both looking at the lawn. "I am trying to remember exactly when I last saw your name," he said quietly. 3 years ago, perhaps. On a patent application. Everything in my chest went still. "You are thinking of someone else," I said. "No," he said. "I am thinking of you. The Lumiere Sciences filing. The gene silencing mechanism. I was on the board at Lumiere. I read every version of that application. Your name was on the 3rd revision, and the 4th, and the substantive claims section that made the whole thing defensible. Then you disappeared." He looked at me. "I was told you left the firm for personal reasons." I said nothing. He reached into his jacket and produced a card. I took it. Henri Beaumont. Managing Director. Beaumont Life Sciences Partners. "I have spent 3 years looking for someone with your specific combination of expertise," he said. "Molecular biology background, patent law, French language proficiency. It is a rare combination." I had nearly given up. "Monsieur Beaumont," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. I appreciate what you're saying. But tonight is my sister's engagement party, and I don't think this is the— I understand completely, he said. I mention it only because I want you to know that I remember your work, and that I remember it as extraordinary. Whatever you are doing now, wherever life has taken you, someone noticed. He inclined his head politely and returned to the center of the room. I stood at the window and said nothing. Outside, the lawn was perfectly dark. I pressed my fingers against the glass and let the cold travel up through my hand until I could think clearly again. Marcus found me 20 minutes later. He came with both European men in tow, the way a man brings witnesses to something he's planned in advance. His expression was pleasant, practiced, designed to look generous. He positioned himself so that I was slightly enclosed, not aggressively, nothing anyone could have pointed to, just the careful geography of a man who understands that physical positioning is a form of language. "Sarah," he said, warmly. "Henri tells me you two have met. Small world, isn't it?" "Very small," I said. "He mentioned you had some background in biotech law. He said it the way one mentions a hobby. Did a little work in that space. Did you?" "Some," I said. "Fascinating. I didn't realize Emma's family had a connection to the industry." He turned to the two men with a small, inclusive smile. "This is Emma's sister. The one I mentioned she studied in Paris for a few years. Speaks a bit of French." He said it to them, not to me. The sentence structured as an introduction but functioning as a miniature biography, defining my Paris years as tourism, my French as amateur, my presence as charming but minor. Then he switched languages. He turned back to me, smiling, and said in French, with the easy confidence of a man who has never doubted a social calculation in his life, "I hope you're enjoying the party. I imagine a room like this must feel quite overwhelming for someone with your more modest experience." The second man, younger, less careful, pressed his lips together to contain something. Marcus continued in French, still smiling. "Emma speaks so highly of you. Of course, families are loyal. It's touching, really." I looked at him. He was watching my face for the flicker of confusion, the slight delay of a person hearing sounds they can't quite place, the particular embarrassment of being spoken to in a language you don't understand while everyone else in the circle can see that you don't understand. I gave him none of it. I let the silence run for exactly 3 seconds. Then I said, in French, not the French of someone who spent a few years in Paris for fun, but the French of 3 years of client work, of depositions, of technical documents, of late nights in Lumiere's research facility, discussing the mechanics of molecular binding with scientists who had no patience for imprecision, I said. "Actually, I find it quite comfortable. I lived and worked here for 3 years. I argued patent claims in this language. Though I appreciate your concern," the younger man looked away. Something that might have been relief crossed Henri Beaumont's face from across the room, where he had positioned himself with a clear line of sight to this conversation. Marcus's smile stayed in place, but it recalibrated. Something behind his eyes shifted, not embarrassment yet, not quite, but the early awareness that the terrain was different from what the map had shown. "Well," he said, switching back to English, "more than a bit of French, then." "A bit," I agreed, "in English." He laughed. It was a good laugh, well practiced, the laugh of a man who can absorb an unexpected development without letting it show. "You should have told Emma to mention that," I assumed. "You assumed correctly," I said. "I've had a more modest path than your other guests." That part was accurate. I let the sentence sit there. He nodded once, still smiling, and steered his guests toward the bar. I expected that to be the end of it. I should have known that men like Marcus Devereaux don't stop. They regroup. 40 minutes later, he stood again, calling for attention. "A second toast," he announced, holding his champagne, a small addition to the evening. He had a particular tradition, he said at every important gathering. He liked to give his international partners an opportunity to address the room, a gesture of inclusion he was very proud of. He gestured to the 2 French men. "And since we have family present who spent time in France," he said, with a smile directed at me, "perhaps this could be a small cultural exchange." The younger French man looked uncertain. The older one, Henri's associate, I realized looked to Henri, who had not moved from his position near the fireplace. Marcus continued. In French now, for the benefit of the room, or rather, for the benefit of his positioning in the room. He spoke about the partnership he and Henri's firm were discussing. He used terms from biotech licensing, from IP valuation, from the specific mechanics of how pharmaceutical patents are structured for international markets. He was fluent, informed, impressive to anyone who didn't know the actual vocabulary. To anyone who did, he was a man reading from notes he'd memorized without fully understanding. He spoke for about 3 minutes. Then he turned to me, expansively, and said in French, clearly, so that the room could observe the moment that surely Emma's sister, having spent time in Paris, would appreciate the complexity of what he had described. Perhaps she could explain it to the rest of Emma's family, in simpler terms. He smiled. A few people laughed, uncertain. My mother's hands, I noticed, were pressed flat against the table. Emma was not laughing. I stood. I hadn't planned to. The decision arrived as a physical fact rather than a thought. I was sitting, and then I was standing, and the room had gone quiet, in the way rooms go quiet when something shifts in the atmosphere. I looked at Marcus. He was still smiling, but the smile had acquired a quality it hadn't had before, watchful, recalculating, the smile of a man who has thrown something and is now watching to see where it lands. I said, in French. In the French of someone who has spent 3 years reading patent claims at midnight and arguing nuance with scientists who will not accept imprecision. You described the exclusivity window incorrectly. Under the EPC framework, the European Patent Convention, the market exclusivity period you referenced applies to small molecule compounds, not biologic therapies. For the kind of gene silencing mechanism your firm has been trying to license, the relevant framework is the EU's Regulation 469, and the protection period is calculated differently. Your projection was off by approximately 18 months. The room was very quiet. Henri Beaumont had set down his champagne glass. I continued, in English now, so everyone could follow. I'm not saying this to embarrass anyone. I'm saying it because if this is the framework being discussed in your partnership negotiations, the numbers are wrong. And someone should probably know that before a term sheet gets signed. Marcus's smile had not moved, but the color behind it had changed. The younger Frenchman leaned toward Henri and said something very quietly. Henri nodded once, slowly, without looking away from me. Marcus laughed. It came out a half-beat late. Well, he said, it seems we have an expert in the family after all. He said it lightly, the tone designed to reframe what had just happened as charming, as a fun moment, as Sarah being endearingly pedantic. He looked around the room for confirmation, and the room, trained by wealth and social obligation, was mostly willing to give it to him. She always was the one who knew everything, Emma said from her end of the table. Her voice was careful, neutral, the voice of a woman managing multiple competing needs. Henri Beaumont put down his glass and walked toward the center of the room. He moved with the deliberate, unhurried pace of a man who has spent 40 years in rooms full of people trying to impress each other and has long since stopped being affected by the performance. Everyone watched him, because in the hierarchy of this room, he was at the top of it. His firm managed $2 billion in European biotech investment, and Marcus needed him, and everyone there understood that Marcus needed him. Henri stopped near the middle of the table, equidistant between Marcus and me. He looked at Marcus first. What Sarah described is correct, he said. The exclusivity framework matters very much in the deal you are proposing. The error she identified would have cost you, I have been calculating, as she spoke, approximately $4 million over the life of the licensing agreement, assuming standard milestone payments. Marcus said, Henri, I don't think. I know you don't, Henri said pleasantly. That is the problem I would like to address. He looked at me then, and something in his expression that had been careful all evening became direct. He said, in French, something I had not expected. The Lumiere Sciences patent. The one you filed. The gene silencing mechanism the core claims. I am going to tell this room what happened to that patent, if you will allow me. I said nothing. He took that as permission. He turned to the room. 3 years ago, he said. In English, our company Beaumont Life Sciences was working with a therapy that we believed could eventually treat a category of rare neurological diseases. The science was extraordinary. The patent strategy was a disaster. We had been through 4 attorneys and 2 firms, and we were running out of time before a competitor filed something similar. He paused. Hartwell and Cross assigned a senior associate to our account. She rebuilt the entire claim structure in 6 weeks. She identified 3 prior art conflicts that our previous attorneys had missed. She wrote the substantive claims in a way that would hold up, "We have tested this," and I can tell you that it is held up in 3 separate patent offices across 2 continents. The room was still. That attorney left the firm not long after. I was told it was personal reasons. I spent 3 years wondering. Henri looked at me. I understand now. My mother had pressed her hand to her mouth. Marcus said, "Henri, this is very generous, but I'm not sure what it has to do with." "It has to do," Henri said, with a patience that was colder than anger, "with the fact that the patent I am describing is now the primary underlying asset in the licensing deal your firm has proposed to mine. The IP your firm wants to sublicense the gene silencing mechanism, the market exclusivity, the framework you described incorrectly, it exists because of the woman you just publicly invited to explain biotech in simpler terms." Someone at the far end of the table put down a glass. "I did not come here tonight to negotiate," Henri continued. "I came because my associate told me the fiancé's family would be present, and I was curious. I am still curious." He looked at me. "I am also, to be direct, interested in making a proposal that has nothing to do with Marcus Devereaux's firm." Marcus said, "I think we should discuss this privately." "We can discuss it wherever you like," Henri said. "But I want Sarah to hear what I am about to say first, because I have been trying to say it for 3 years and I have not had the opportunity." He turned back to me and spoke in French, the formal, direct French of a business offer, not a social kindness. "My firm is opening a U.S. office in New York. We need a director of IP strategy. Someone who understands both the science and the law and has the language to navigate the European regulatory environment. I have been told such people are rare. I know that they are." He paused. "You are exactly who I have been looking for. I would have hired you 3 years ago if you had not disappeared." The room was absolutely quiet. I looked at Henri. I looked at my mother, whose eyes were wet, who was looking at me like she was seeing something she had missed for a long time and was only now recognizing. I looked at Emma, who had stopped performing and was simply sitting with her hands in her lap, looking at me directly, with an expression I hadn't seen on her face since we were children, uncomplicated, unguarded. Something that might have been pride. I looked at Marcus, who was standing in the middle of his own engagement party with the expression of a man watching a business deal restructure itself around him without his permission. I said, in English, clearly, so everyone present could hear, "I appreciate the correction being public, Monsieur Beaumont. I want to be clear that I did not come here tonight to disrupt anything. I came to celebrate my sister's engagement." I looked at Marcus. "I hope that's still what we're doing." There was a silence. Then Marcus said, in a voice that had lost something, the particular quality of a man who has always been the most prepared person in any room and has just encountered the experience of not being, "Of course it is." He raised his glass. The room, relieved, raised theirs. I raised mine, and this time I actually drank. The rest of the evening moved around me differently than the first part had. People who had looked through me before found reasons to make eye contact. Henri's associate introduced herself properly and asked 3 specific questions about my work history. Emma's college roommate, who had not spoken to me all evening, asked if I was really fluent in French and seemed genuinely surprised when I said yes. My mother found me near the end of the night, by the coat check. She said, "I didn't know." I said, "I know you didn't." She said, "I told you not to make it about yourself." Her voice broke slightly on the last word. "I always do that. I always tell you not to take up too much space." I looked at her, this woman who had raised me, who had loved me in the particular anxious way of someone who has always been a little afraid of the world, who had spent 30 years trying to make me smaller so the world wouldn't notice me and decide I was too much. I said, "You don't have to do that anymore. I can take care of myself." She hugged me in the entryway of someone else's house, surrounded by guests collecting their coats, and I let her, Because she was my mother, and 3 years is a long time to be waiting for someone to see you. Emma walked out with me to the car. We stood on the driveway in the cold, October dark, the house glowing behind us. She said, 3 years ago, when I called you, I said, we don't have to do this tonight. She said, I wasn't okay, but I also wasn't as not okay as I made it sound. I was scared, and you were the only person I knew how to reach for, and I didn't think enough about what it would cost you. She stopped. I've known that for 3 years. I just didn't know how to say it. I thought about 3 years of freelance work, of apartments smaller than I wanted, of watching other people's careers advance from the outside. I thought about the patent that had apparently survived, that was apparently worth something, that had been carrying my name through rooms I was never in. I thought about the particular loneliness of being competent in ways that no one can see. I said, I know you were scared. I know it was real. And I know you didn't do it to hurt me. I looked at the dark lawn, the bare trees at the edge of the property, the first stars coming through the cloud cover. But someday I want to talk about all of it. Actually talk about it. Not manage it. Not perform it. Just say what's true. Emma nodded. Her breath made small clouds in the cold air. I'll be here, she said. I know, I said. On the drive home, I held Henri Beaumont's card in my hand without looking at it. I knew what was on it. I had read it 3 times already, standing at the window while the party continued around me, and each time the words had the same quality, real, specific, addressed to me rather than to someone else. There is a version of the past 3 years where the phone call from Emma never comes, where I file the Lumiere patent and make partner at 32 and spend my career in the clean, bounded world of intellectual property. I can trace that version sometimes, see its outlines, imagine the person I might have been, but I am the person I am, which is someone who answered the phone and stayed, who lost things and kept going, who stood in a room full of people who had already decided what I was and said something true anyway. That person is not lesser than the one who never had to make the choice. I put Henri's card in my wallet, between my transit card and my library card, ordinary things for daily use, and looked out the window at the highway, at the ordinary dark of a Saturday night in October, at the lights of the city coming back into view, and thought about Monday morning, when I would call the number on the card and begin, again, whatever came next. The answer, when it came, surprised me with its clarity. I was ready.